They told me I was overreacting. But what would you do if your family uninvited your husband from your sister's wedding, then smiled while spending the money you gave them? I said nothing. Just one sentence changed everything. He paid for your honeymoon. The room froze. The truth hit harder than any revenge I could have planned. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. I never thought being the oldest daughter in a respectable family could make me feel like an outsider in my own home. My name is Claire Mitchell, 34, born and raised in Portland, Oregon. Growing up, my parents, Thomas and Margaret Turner, taught me one rule: reputation is everything. Love, emotions, even comfort came second to appearances. Their house in Lake Oswego was spotless, every corner curated to impress guests. Pictures lined the walls: my parents' wedding portrait, Olivia's graduation photos, Dad receiving an award from the Oregon Bar Association. But one frame on the hallway shelf was empty, the one meant for my wedding photo. It had been that way for years, ever since they decided not to display it. Back in 2017, I brought Evan home for the first time. He was 36, then a quiet software engineer from Seattle, who'd rather talk about space exploration or data ethics than sports or politics. We met at a tech conference I helped organize. He was everything my family wasn't: calm, thoughtful, a little awkward, and completely uninterested in impressing anyone. When I told Mom and Dad I was bringing him to dinner, Mom's reaction was polite on the surface, but cautious underneath. "That's nice, honey. What does he do again?" "He's a programmer at a startup in Seattle," I said. There was a long pause. "Oh," she replied the way she did when she found something slightly disappointing, but not worth arguing about. That evening, when we pulled into their driveway, I felt my stomach tighten. The Turner house was glowing from every window like it always did when Mom was hosting. I could already smell her pot roast mixed with the faint scent of candles labeled success and ambition. She opened the door, elegant as ever, in her cream sweater and pearls, her eyes scanning Evan from shoes to hair. "Oh, you work with computers?" she asked, her smile perfectly rehearsed. "That must be quiet work. Not very exciting, I imagine." Evan smiled politely. "It keeps me busy. I like solving problems." Dad appeared behind her, holding his glasses in one hand. "Do you come from a legal family, Evan?" he asked while shaking hands. "No, sir," Evan replied calmly. "My dad's a retired engineer. My mom taught middle school." Dad nodded once and said nothing else. During dinner, the clinking of silverware was the loudest sound at the table. Olivia, my younger sister, then 21 and full of life, tried to lighten the mood by talking about her new job at a local high school. "Claire says you're into tech, right?" she asked Evan. "That's cool. I barely know how to use my projector without breaking it." He laughed softly. "Then you're already ahead of most people I work with." For a second, I saw warmth in Olivia's eyes, but Mom quickly changed the subject. "Claire, dear, you might want to sit straighter. It looks more refined." The rest of the meal passed with small talk that felt more like an interview. Dad asked about Evan's salary range, disguised as casual curiosity. Mom praised the wine she'd chosen, hinting that quality speaks for itself. I kept smiling, pretending not to hear the judgment laced in every word. When dessert came, Olivia leaned toward me and whispered, "They're impossible. Just breathe." She meant well, but her voice carried pity, and that hurt even more. After we left the table, Mom asked to speak to me alone in the kitchen. The hum of the dishwasher filled the silence between us. "Claire," she began softly, "you've always been ambitious, and that's good, but relationships should elevate you, not pull you down." I froze. "What do you mean by that?" She smiled faintly. "He's fine, but you've worked so hard to build your name. People notice who we're connected to. You don't want to settle for someone who blends into the background." I swallowed hard. "Mom, he's kind. He listens. Isn't that what matters?" She reached out, touching my hand. "Sweetheart, kindness doesn't open doors." I walked out before I could say something I'd regret. Outside, the night air felt heavier than usual. Evan was waiting by the car, leaning against the passenger door, so he asked quietly, "They don't like me, do they?" I forced a smile. "They just need time. They'll understand when they see how much I love you." He nodded, looking at the house behind me. The curtains on the living room window moved slightly. Through the gap, I saw my mother standing there, arms crossed, watching us. As we drove away, the lights from their house faded in the rearview mirror, but her gaze stayed with me. I told myself it was just a rough start, that every family needed time to adjust. Deep down, though, something inside whispered that this was only the beginning of a much bigger divide, one I'd spend years trying to bridge. The car fell silent, the road stretching ahead toward Seattle. Evan reached over, taking my hand without a word. His palm was warm, steady. I looked at him, smiled faintly, and told myself love would be enough to fix this. But even then, part of me already knew it wouldn't be. 2 years later, on a bright June afternoon in 2019, I married Evan under a canopy of trees in Forest Park. The ceremony was small, 40 guests at most. A few of my coworkers came. Evan's parents drove down from Seattle, and a handful of friends filled the benches we'd decorated with eucalyptus and white ribbon. The air smelled like pine and rain, the kind of simple beauty I'd always wanted. My parents arrived 15 minutes late. Mom stepped out of their SUV in a cream-colored lace dress that looked suspiciously bridal, holding a clutch that probably cost more than our entire floral budget. Dad shook Evan's hand stiffly and said, "Nice weather for a quick wedding." I smiled through the awkwardness because I refused to let them ruin that day. "I'm glad you came." I told them, and I meant it, even though part of me knew they came out of obligation, not joy. When I walked down the aisle, Evan's eyes filled with tears. His voice trembled as he said his vows, promising that I'd never have to earn his love. Mom dabbed her eyes, too, but not from emotion. Her lipstick had smudged, and she was worried the photographer would catch it. After the ceremony, while guests mingled near the picnic tables, I noticed Mom chatting with one of Evan's friends. Her tone clipped evaluating. "So you're all from the tech industry?" she asked, smiling too wide. "That must be interesting work." Dad kept checking his watch, muttering about traffic back to Lake Oswego. Olivia, my sister, took a selfie with me, posted it online, and captioned it simply, "Family Day, not my sister's wedding, just family day." That night, as Evan and I cut the small 2-tier cake we'd ordered from a local bakery, I felt the first deep, quiet peace I'd had in years. I thought maybe this is enough. Our vows, our laughter, the people who actually care. But as I watched my parents leave early, waving without emotion, a tiny crack opened inside me. A week later, Mom called. "The pictures turned out nicely," she said. "You might consider submitting a few to the Portland Bride feature section. You know, exposure is important for your event planning business." I laughed softly. "Mom, it wasn't that kind of wedding." She sighed. "That's the problem. People forget weddings are about more than love. They're about image. If you don't look successful, no one believes you are." When we hung up, I stared at the phone until the screen went dark. Evan came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't. Just family being family. That moment was the last time I truly believed I could fix it. The following year, I kept trying. Every holiday, every dinner invitation, I showed up, hoping things would get better. Thanksgiving 2020. I drove to my parents' house with 2 homemade pies and a bottle of Pinot Noir Evan had picked out. Mom opened the door, kissed my cheek, and said, "Oh, you brought dessert. That's sweet. Olivia already ordered pumpkin and pecan from Crave Bakery, but yours will be good for leftovers." Inside, Olivia was standing by the fireplace showing Dad photos from her latest school project. "They just made me lead of the curriculum committee," she said proudly. Mom beamed. "See, that's what happens when you take initiative, dear." I set the pies on the counter and joined Evan at the table. He looked around, his expression calm but withdrawn. When we sat down for dinner, Dad told a long story about a friend's son who had just been accepted to Yale Law. Every sentence sounded like a reminder of what success was supposed to look like. "So, Claire," Mom said halfway through the meal, "you're still doing the smaller events, right? Nothing too big yet." "I'm focusing on boutique weddings," I replied. "It's more personal that way." She smiled politely. "That's nice. Though you might consider aiming higher. Corporate events pay better." Evan said nothing. He poured wine past dishes, kept his posture composed, but I could feel the tension radiating from him like static electricity. I caught his eye, a small shake of my head, telling him it wasn't worth reacting. After dinner, Olivia scrolled through her phone, showing Dad photos of her students. "They surprised me with a cake for my birthday," she said. "It's sweet how much they adore me." Mom turned to me. "When you have kids, you'll understand." I smiled thinly. Maybe someday. They didn't notice the edge in my tone, or maybe they did and enjoyed it. Every conversation with them felt like walking barefoot on glass, careful not to bleed. Later that night back home, my phone buzzed with a new email. It was from Mom. The subject line read, "Just a suggestion." I opened it. "Sweetheart, maybe next time you and Evan can come separately. He's lovely, but he doesn't seem to enjoy himself at family events. You could relax more without worrying about him. Love, Mom." I deleted it before finishing the second line. Evan was sitting at the kitchen table, coding something on his laptop. "What did she say?" he asked without looking up. "Nothing," I said too quickly. "Just Thanksgiving leftovers." He looked at me then quietly, as if reading a page I was trying to hide. "I just hope," he said after a pause, "that someday they'll see me as the man you chose, not the mistake they think you made." His voice was steady, but it pierced through me. I wanted to promise him that they'd come around, that love could soften pride, but the words wouldn't form. Instead, I walked over, put my hands on his shoulders, and whispered, "Maybe one day." That night, as we went to bed, I lay awake listening to the rain hit the window. The cracks in my family were silent, but widening, spreading through every memory. I still tried to hold together. I didn't know it yet, but those tiny fractures would soon split wide open. And nothing, no kindness, no gift, no patience, would ever fix them again. It was a Thursday morning in May 2023 when my phone rang in the middle of a vendor call. I was finalizing floral arrangements for a corporate event downtown, half listening to the designer on the other end, when Olivia's name flashed on my screen. I almost ignored it. She rarely called unless she needed something, but I answered anyway. Her voice exploded through the phone before I could even say hello. "Daniel proposed last night. Can you believe it? Guess how many carats, Claire? Guess." I laughed, caught off guard. "I don't know. 2. 3. A full 3 carats cushion cut. It's perfect." For a moment, her excitement was contagious. I felt a warmth I hadn't felt toward my family in a long time. "Liv." "That's amazing," I said. "Tell me everything." "Where are you?" "At Mom and Dad's." "You have to come over right now. We're planning already." I didn't think twice. I grabbed my keys, told my assistant to reschedule the meeting, and drove straight to Lake Oswego. The spring rain had just stopped, and the air smelled like lilacs. I could almost trick myself into thinking this would be one of those rare good days. When I arrived, the Turner's house was alive, in a way I hadn't seen for years. Mom was making tea in her silk robe. Dad was already pouring champagne, and Olivia sat on the couch, surrounded by bridal magazines, her engagement ring sparkling under the chandelier. "Look at it, Claire," she squealed, holding out her hand. "Daniel picked it himself. Isn't it perfect?" "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely meaning it. Daniel was standing near the fireplace, smiling nervously, one hand in his pocket. He was polite, gentle, the kind of man who seemed too normal for my family's taste. "Congratulations, Daniel," I said, shaking his hand. "You've made her the happiest person in this house." He chuckled softly. "That's the plan." We all sat down, and for once conversation flowed easily. Mom and Dad reminisced about their own engagement, laughing over details I'd never heard. For a brief moment I saw the family I used to imagine we were, the one that existed only when things looked good from the outside. Then, as talk turned to the wedding budget, the mood shifted. Dad cleared his throat. "The only issue is, well, we've had some unexpected expenses lately. The hospital bills from last year hit us harder than we thought." Mom's smile tightened. "We'll have to keep things simple this time. Maybe a small church ceremony and a family dinner after." I saw Olivia's expression falter. She tried to hide her disappointment, but her voice trembled when she said, "That's okay, really. I just want everyone there." I looked at her. My little sister still trying to please everyone, even when it hurt her. Memories flashed me defending her in high school when Mom yelled about her grades sneaking her ice cream after she cried in her room. For all her flaws, she was still my baby sister. Before I could stop myself, I said, "You deserve the wedding you want. I'll help. I'll cover some of the cost." Mom blinked. "Oh, honey, that's not necessary. How much were you thinking?" Dad asked quickly, trying to sound casual. 12,000, I said. The number came out of my mouth before I even thought it through. The room went silent for a beat. Olivia jumped up and hugged me, nearly knocking over her teacup. "Oh my God. Claire, are you serious? That's incredible. You're the best sister ever." Mom looked genuinely touched, her eyes softening. "That's very generous of you, sweetheart." For once, their smiles looked real. That evening I told Evan over dinner. He set down his fork surprised. $12,000. I nodded, a little nervous. It felt right. They've been struggling, and Olivia deserves a real celebration. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then a small smile crept across his face. "Oh, then I'll add something too." "You don't have to," I said. "I want to," he replied. "What about a honeymoon package? Somewhere she's always dreamed of, like the Maldives." I stared at him. "Evan, that would cost at least 18,000. He shrugged. "I've been saving. If it helps them see that we care, if it builds some kind of bridge, it's worth it." My chest tightened. I'd spent years defending him to my family, trying to prove he wasn't the cold, distant man they thought he was. And here he was, offering his savings for their happiness. "Are you sure?" I asked quietly. He smiled. "You once told me they judge people by what they can give, so let's give them kindness. Maybe they'll finally see who we are." We spent the next hour at the kitchen table scrolling through resort options, overwater bungalows, turquoise lagoons, infinity pools, stretching into the sea. The images looked like something out of a dream. At one point, I caught my reflection in the laptop screen, half lit by the blue glow, half shadowed by doubt. "You really think this could change things?" I asked. Evan reached for my hand. "If it doesn't, at least we'll know we tried." The rain started again outside, soft against the window. I rested my head on his shoulder, staring at the images of white sand and palm trees. For the first time in a long while, I felt hope, a fragile, glittering thing, as delicate as the ring on Olivia's finger. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that I was about to pay a much higher price for trying to buy peace. I ignored it. I wanted to believe that this time, love and generosity would finally be enough. It was late August 2024, 2 weeks before Olivia's wedding, when I noticed something strange. Every day, I'd check the mail after work. Bills, catalogs, an occasional invitation from a client, but never one from my own family. The wedding was practically around the corner, and yet there was no sign of an invitation for me and Evan. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it got lost. Maybe Mom forgot to send ours separately since she knew we'd already RSVP'd verbally. But the unease grew stronger each day until it turned into a weight I couldn't ignore. That Thursday afternoon, sunlight poured through our apartment window in Portland Landing across the empty counter where I'd sorted mail for the 100th time. I stared at the bare surface, heart sinking. I thought they were busy preparing, but maybe they were busy excluding. Evan was on a work call in the living room. I slipped my shoes on quietly, grabbed my car keys, and told myself I just wanted to clear things up. No confrontation, no drama, just clarity. The Turner house looked like something out of a bridal catalog when I arrived. White flowers everywhere, silk ribbons hanging from the banister candles lining the entryway. The scent of vanilla and roses was almost suffocating. Olivia stood in the living room wearing a simple but elegant wedding dress, twirling in front of the mirror while Mom clapped softly. "Oh, Claire," Mom exclaimed when she saw me. "You're just in time. Doesn't she look beautiful?" "She does," I said truthfully, stepping inside. The dress suited her. She looked happy. For a second, I wanted to stay in that illusion. Then I asked gently, "Em, did you forget to send my invitation? I figured it might have gotten lost in the mail." Olivia froze for just a moment, too long to be innocent. Then she forced a smile. "Oh, actually, I wanted to give it to you in person. It feels more special that way." She walked to a side table, picked up a cream envelope, and handed it to me. The paper was thick, embossed with gold trim. Elegant. Expensive. My heart lifted for a split second before dropping again as I opened it. "Ms. Claire Mitchell," it read. "Just me. No. And guest. No mention of Evan." My hands trembled slightly. "There must be a mistake," I said quietly. "Where's Evan's name?" Olivia hesitated, her eyes darting toward Mom and Dad. Dad was by the window, pretending to check his phone. Mom smoothed her dress. Her smile practiced. "Sweetheart," she said carefully. "We just thought, since Evan doesn't enjoy large gatherings, it might be easier for everyone if he sits this one out." I looked at her for a long moment. Easier for everyone. Mom folded her hands. "You know how he gets at big events, so quiet. It's not personal." My voice stayed calm, though my pulse pounded in my ears. "Not personal." "You're excluding my husband from my sister's wedding, and you think that's not personal?" Dad cleared his throat without looking at me. "Claire, let's be reasonable. He doesn't like this kind of thing anyway. You said it yourself once. I said he's introverted, not unwelcome, I replied. Olivia stepped forward, her tone turning defensive. We just want the day to be light and fun, not tense. Everyone knows he doesn't fit in with... Careful, I cut her off. My voice was quiet, but sharp enough to make her stop mid-sentence. Finish that thought. She looked away, her cheeks flushed. You're making this bigger than it is. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay composed. I'm not making it bigger. I'm realizing what it's always been. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner and the rustle of Mom adjusting the flower arrangement on the table as if tidying could erase the tension in the air. I set the invitation down on the counter. You know, I said softly, I've spent months helping you plan this wedding. I picked the florist. I found the caterer. I even helped negotiate the venue discount. And I did it all thinking we were finally moving forward as a family. Olivia's eyes flickered with guilt, but she said nothing. I smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. I only wish your wedding stays as perfect as you imagined, especially since some things are about to lose their value. She frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Just a blessing, I said, slipping my bag over my shoulder. You'll understand later. As I walked out, Mom called after me. Claire, please don't make this harder than it has to be. I turned to face her at the doorway. You're right. It doesn't have to be hard, unless you decide to make it that way. The evening light hit the front windows as I stepped outside. The reflection of the house shimmered on my car door. White flowers, golden ribbons, perfection wrapped in hypocrisy. I slid into the driver's seat and stared at the envelope in my lap, my name shining in gold letters that suddenly looked cheap. On the drive home, I didn't cry. I didn't even curse. I just felt something inside me shift, the kind of quiet break you can't hear until it's too late. By the time I pulled into our apartment garage, the sky had darkened, and I finally whispered to myself, they've chosen what matters to them. And that realization hurt more than I could ever admit. The next morning, I woke up with a strange calmness, the kind that comes after a storm you didn't see coming. I'd spent most of the night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word from the day before. By sunrise, the decision was made. I drove back to my parents' house before breakfast, the pale light cutting through the fog that hung over Lake Oswego. Their silver Lexus was already in the driveway, and I could see steam rising from the kitchen window. The scent of coffee and toast hit me as I stepped inside. They were all there. Mom, Dad, and Olivia gathered around the long oak table dressed like they were waiting for guests instead of me. Claire, Mom said with forced brightness. We weren't expecting you so early. Coffee? I shook my head and stood by the table. In my hand was a white envelope thick with folded papers, reservation confirmations, itineraries, everything Evan had arranged for the Maldives. My voice came out steady, emotionless. I just want to confirm something, I said. You didn't invite my husband because you think he's not good enough, right? Dad's fork paused midair. Mom's smile faltered, her tone measured. Sweetheart, don't take it that way. It's just that Evan doesn't enjoy these kinds of gatherings. We thought he'd be more comfortable staying home while I sit alone at a wedding he helped pay for. I interrupted. That's considerate of you. Olivia looked up from her plate, her expression uneasy. Claire, please, this isn't what you think. It's not about him. It's just, we had to keep things small and reached into my bag, pulled out the envelope, and placed it in the center of the table. This, I said quietly, is the confirmation for your honeymoon. The Maldives, first-class flights, overwater bungalow, every detail perfect. Mom's eyes darted to the papers, confusion flickering across her face. What is this? Evan paid for it, I said simply. He wanted to surprise you, to show goodwill, but I guess he won't need to anymore. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Olivia blinked rapidly, her voice trembling. Wait, he did what Dad's jaw clenched. That's enough, Claire. You don't need to make a scene. I'm not making a scene, I said, meeting his eyes. I'm making a correction. I slid the papers closer to him. Because I just canceled everything. The refund should hit Evan's account in a few days. Mom stood, quickly reaching for my arm. Claire, you can't do that. It's too late to. It's not. I cut in. And even if it were, I'd do it anyway. She gripped my wrist tighter. You'll ruin her honeymoon. Do you really want to hurt your sister over a misunderstanding? I looked down at her hand, the same one that used to brush my hair when I was a child, now gripping me like I was a threat. You once told me whoever earns the money gets to decide how it's spent, I said softly. I'm following your advice. I gently pulled away. Olivia pushed her chair back so fast it scraped the floor. I can't believe this, she said, tears welling in her eyes. You're jealous. You've always been jealous. I turned toward her incredulous. Jealous of what? Liv. Of being treated like I'm less because I married someone you don't approve of. She wiped at her face angrily. You don't understand how stressful this has been. We're trying to make everything perfect, and you... I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. Perfect. You mean fake. You don't want perfect, you want pretty. Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. Enough. This is not the time or place for honesty, I said quietly. The room went silent. I looked around at them, my parents, my sister, and felt something crack open inside me, something final. They had spent years teaching me that silence keeps peace, that family image mattered more than truth. But in that moment, I realized peace built on silence was just another kind of prison. Mom's eyes were wet now. Claire, please, she said, her voice breaking. Olivia will be devastated. Maybe she should be, I replied. Maybe she'll finally learn what it feels like to lose something because of her choices. I picked up my purse from the chair, slid the empty envelope inside, and turned toward the door. Behind me, Olivia's voice cracked. You're ruining my wedding. I paused, hand on the doorknob, then looked back. No, I said softly. I'm saving you from pretending it's something it's not. As I opened the door, Dad muttered, You've always had a flair for drama. I didn't turn around. You should know I said you raised me. A glass hit the floor as I stepped outside, a sharp, shattering sound that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. For a second, I imagined it was the sound of something else breaking something far older than any piece of glass. I walked to my car without looking back. When I started the engine, my hands were steady. The morning sun glinted off the hood, reflecting the house behind me, white, perfect, and hollow. As I pulled away, I whispered under my breath, That's the only sound I needed to hear today. The glass had already shattered. There was nothing left to fix. That night the house felt quieter than usual, but my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I sat on the sofa staring at the screen as messages kept popping up one after another. Mom. Dad. Olivia. Each one a variation of the same plea. Please think about this. You're overreacting. Don't ruin your sister's wedding. Not a single word said sorry. Evan was at his desk typing quietly on his laptop. The rhythmic clicks of his keyboard were the only sound in the room. After a few minutes, he looked up and said softly, I sent the cancellation request. We'll lose about $300 in fees. He gave a small shrug, worth every dollar. The absurdity of it all hit me at once, and I laughed, too loudly, too suddenly. It broke into a half-sob halfway through. $300 to finally buy our peace, I said, wiping my face. That's a bargain. He closed his laptop, walked over, and sat beside me. I'm sorry it had to come to this, he said. I shook my head. You don't have to apologize. I should have seen it coming. For a while, we just sat there, the glow from the streetlights flickering across the living room. My phone buzzed again. Mom's name appeared, then disappeared. The next morning, I woke to a new email. Subject line. Let's fix this. It was from her. Claire, it began. There's been a lot of gossip after what happened yesterday. I need you to tell people it was just a misunderstanding. Say you overreacted, that it's all fine now. Your father's reputation is on the line, and Olivia's stressed enough as it is. Please do the right thing, for the family. No mention of Evan, no acknowledgement of what they'd done. I typed one word in reply. No. Then I hit send and deleted the thread. By noon, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I picked up my phone and called Olivia. She answered after a few rings, her tone already defensive. If you're calling to lecture me, don't. I just want to know if you understand why I did what I did. There was a pause, then her voice came cold through the line. Yeah, because you can't stand not being the center of attention. You've always had to win, Claire. I closed my eyes, took a breath. No, I said, because I've already lost enough. For a second I thought she might soften, that something in her would crack, but all I heard was a sharp exhale and the flat tone of a disconnected call. That afternoon I tried to focus on work. My inbox was full of event inquiries, brides wanting quotes, vendors confirming schedules. I typed replies on autopilot, but my mind was elsewhere. Every keystroke felt mechanical, like my body was just going through the motions of normal life, while my heart stayed stuck in the wreckage of the day before. When Evan came home from a meeting later that evening, I could tell something was off. His jaw was tight, his eyes tired. He hung his coat slowly, like the weight of the fabric had doubled. "What happened?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He walked to the counter, poured himself a glass of water, and finally said, "Someone at work pulled me aside today." I waited. "They said there's talk going around, that I only got promoted because of your family's money." The words landed like a slap. "What? That's ridiculous." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Yeah, but apparently someone told HR that your dad had influence with one of the board members, that he helped me get my last contract renewal." My stomach twisted. "Evan, that's not. No one would actually believe that, right?" He didn't look at me. "You'd be surprised how fast rumors spread in a company full of people competing for the same job." I pressed my palms to my temples. "This is them. It has to be them. Who else would even know your promotion details?" He nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I thought." We stood there in silence, the refrigerator humming faintly in the background. For the first time, I saw a flicker of anger in Evan's usually calm face, not loud, but sharp, controlled. He leaned against the counter and looked straight at me. "You know what the worst part is? They don't just want to humiliate you. They want to make me disappear from your life, your reputation, your career. They want to prove they were right about me." I felt tears stinging my eyes. "They'll never win, Evan. I won't let them." He walked closer, his voice low but steady. "Then we don't stay quiet anymore." I swallowed. "What do you mean?" He looked down at the phone on the counter where my parents' messages still sat unread. "If they want to play this like a war," he said, "they've forgotten who they raised you to be." He paused, then met my eyes. "If they want to fight, they'll be fighting someone who knows the law, and who's finally ready to use it." The conviction in his tone both scared and steadied me. I nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside me again. This time not from hurt, but from resolve. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, distant but growing closer. I sat back on the couch as the first drops of rain hit the window, thinking about how easily love could turn into armor when pushed hard enough. For the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. The rain hadn't stopped all morning. It came down in steady sheets, turning the streets of downtown Portland into a blur of silver and gray. I was sitting at the kitchen counter with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold when the knock came at the door. The mail carrier handed me a large manila envelope, the kind used for contracts and official notices. The logo in the corner stopped me cold. Turner & Associates, my father's law firm. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I knew what it was before I even opened it, but I tore it open anyway. Inside was a letter printed on crisp white paper signed by one of Dad's junior partners. Notice of legal claim demand for restitution of conditional gift. It stated that I had failed to uphold the terms of the family contribution toward the wedding of Ms. Olivia Turner, and therefore owed repayment of the $12,000 I'd withdrawn under false pretenses. My hands shook as I read. They weren't just cutting me off, they were suing me. I set the paper down slowly. Evan walked in from his office, reading my face before I said a word. "What happened?" I handed him the letter. He read it silently, his expression tightening with each line. When he finished, he exhaled through his nose and placed it back on the counter, like it might burn him. "They're actually suing you," he said, disbelief lacing his voice. I nodded. "No, he's suing me, my father." Evan rubbed the back of his neck. "We need to get a lawyer." I gave a bitter laugh. "You think the man literally signed it from his own firm?" He didn't laugh. "I'm serious, Claire. You can't go into this alone." By noon, we were sitting in a sleek office downtown. Our attorney, a composed woman named Stephanie Moore, scanned the letter quickly, her brow furrowing. "This is unusual," she said. "I've seen family disputes, but not like this. Suing your own daughter isn't exactly a good look." "Tell me about it," I muttered. She looked up at me. "Do you want to try mediation before filing a formal response? It might save you the headache." With the man who used to lecture me about ethics over Sunday dinner, I said, "No thanks. If he wants to play lawyer, I'll meet him in his own arena." Evan reached for my hand under the table. His grip was firm grounding. I didn't realize how cold my fingers had gotten until he held them. The formal meeting was scheduled for the following week. The day arrived with the same endless rain. The Turner and Associates building stood on a corner in the Pearl District, tall glass and polished, the kind of place built to impress clients. I'd been there before as a teenager, tagging along with Dad when he wanted to show me how real success looked. I never imagined I'd return as his opponent. We were led into a large conference room with a long oak table, leather chairs, and framed law degrees lining the walls. My father was already there in a navy suit tie perfectly knotted. He didn't look up when we entered. Mom sat beside him, her face pale but composed. She looked like she hadn't slept. I wasn't sure if it was guilt or embarrassment. Across from them, I took my seat. Stephanie sat next to me, Evan on my other side. He placed a folder of bank statements and receipts neatly in front of him. The kind of quiet precision that made me proud and broke my heart. The silence stretched until Dad finally spoke. "Claire." He began, his tone detached, like I was a stranger. "You've created an unnecessary spectacle. All I'm asking is for you to do the right thing, return what doesn't belong to you." I tilted my head. "I didn't realize gifts came with conditions. Maybe you should have written them on the check." He frowned. "You accepted those funds under the understanding that they would be used for Olivia's wedding. Since you canceled your participation in said event, the original purpose is void." Mom cleared her throat softly. "Thomas." He cut her off. "This isn't personal, Margaret. It's legal." My lawyer leaned forward. "Mr. Turner?" The funds were transferred directly to Ms. Mitchell's account and used as agreed to pay vendors and deposits for the wedding. The money was spent as intended. There's no legal basis for restitution. Dad didn't even look at her. "Then I suppose we'll let a judge decide." I leaned back, staring at him. "You're willing to stand in court and tell the world you sued your own daughter because she defended her husband?" His eyes flicked up at me, cold and flat. "You've humiliated this family. You think I'll let that go unanswered?" My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed even. "You keep saying family, but it sounds like you mean image." The air in the room felt thick, heavy. Evan slid a piece of paper across the table toward my father. For the record, he said quietly, "Here's proof of the Maldives trip payment. Every cent was from my personal account. It was a gift. Unconditional, like love is supposed to be. Dad didn't touch the paper. Mom did." Her hands trembled as she read the line that said, "Gift purchase confirmation." She whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. For the first time, I saw something crack in her perfect composure. The junior associate sitting beside my father shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Turner," he said quietly, "the wording on this doesn't support a conditional claim." Dad's jaw tightened. "We're done here." He gathered his papers, but I wasn't finished. "You know, I said you taught me everything I know about standing my ground, about not letting people walk over you. I guess I finally learned that lesson." He stopped at the door, turned slightly. "If this gets out," he said, his voice low and sharp, "we lose everything. Our name, our clients, everything I built." I met his gaze. "Then maybe the people you built it for should know what it's built on." He didn't respond, he just left. Mom followed slower, her eyes meeting mine for a moment. Sad, conflicted, and wordless. Outside, the rain had turned into a drizzle. I walked down the courthouse steps, the wind catching my hair, my heart pounding, but lighter than it had been in months. I didn't win that day in any official sense. There was no verdict, no declaration. But as the door closed behind me, I knew the truth had already done its work. I didn't need the law to prove I was right. The truth had done it for me. 3 days after the meeting at my father's law firm, I got a text from an unfamiliar number while I was eating lunch at my desk. "Hey, Claire, it's Ryan. Remember me? We were in journalism club back in high school. Just heard something wild. Did you know someone filed a lawsuit against their own daughter this week?" I stared at the message for a long moment, my stomach twisting. I hadn't heard from Ryan in years. He was now a reporter for a local Portland paper, the kind that covered community scandals and human interest stories. I typed back slowly. "Yeah, I know." He replied almost instantly. "It's your dad, isn't it?" My fingers hovered over the keyboard. There was no point denying it. Yes. He didn't text again right away, and I hoped that meant he'd decided to let it go. But a minute later, another bubble appeared. "This is big, Claire. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I wrote. "And Ryan, please, don't write about it." He sent one more message, off the record. "You don't deserve this. I didn't answer. I just turned off my phone and tried to go back to work, pretending I could drown out the noise before it began. But a week later, it began anyway. The first sign was a link someone sent me with no message attached. It led to a blog post by Julia Bennett, a local lifestyle writer with a big online following. The headline read, "The Sister Who Paid for Love." The article didn't use names, but it didn't have to. It told the story of a woman who helped pay for her sister's wedding and honeymoon, only to be excluded from the event and later sued by her family. Julia wrote with sympathy and outrage, describing it as a betrayal that money can't justify. The comment section exploded. Unbelievable. What kind of parents do that? I hope she cuts them off for good. Sounds like an Oregon soap opera. By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking. I called Ryan immediately. "You said you wouldn't write about it," I said. "I didn't," he replied, sounding defensive. "I swear, but stories like this travel fast. Someone must have leaked it to Julia. Someone, I said, try Mom's friends. They probably couldn't resist turning it into a pity story." That night, my phone rang again. It was my mother. Her voice was sharp, almost panicked. "What did you do?" "What do you mean? Don't play dumb? The article everyone's calling me Claire. The neighbors, the store vendors. You've humiliated this family." I gripped the phone tighter. "No, Mom. You did that when you decided to treat me like a stranger. I just stayed quiet long enough for the truth to speak on its own." Her voice cracked. "You're tearing this family apart." I closed my eyes. "No, Mom. You tore it apart years ago. I'm just the one who stopped pretending it's whole." I hung up before she could answer. Over the next few days, social media did what it always does, fed on drama until it grew teeth. Posts popped up everywhere, screenshots of the article, quotes speculation. Someone on Reddit even connected it to Turner and Associates posting a picture of my father from his firm's website. The headline read, "Local Attorney Sues His Own Daughter." The comments were merciless. "Imagine hiring this guy to represent you in family court. This man gives family values a whole new meaning. Poor woman. Hope she sues him back." The internet didn't know me, but they knew enough to care, and to judge. Olivia must have seen it too, because the next night she posted something on her Facebook page. A single sentence, but it said everything. Some people need to learn their place. Within an hour, someone took a screenshot and shared it on Twitter. By morning, it had thousands of shares captioned with things like, "Guess which sister this is?" I sat at my kitchen counter, scrolling through the chaos, feeling both exposed and strangely free. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel, her fiancé. "Claire, I'm so sorry. I didn't know things were this bad. I never would have gone along with this if I had." I stared at the text for a long time, then typed back, "You seem like a good man, Daniel. I hope she treats you better than she treated me." He didn't reply. That evening, Evan came home with takeout. We sat on the couch eating in silence, the TV flickering with some local news coverage that had started mentioning the story without naming names. "A Portland family's legal dispute over a wedding gift has gone viral," the anchor said. Sources close to the case describe it as a tragic fallout between parents and daughter. Evan turned off the TV. "It's only a matter of time before someone says our names." "I know," I said. "Let them." The following afternoon it happened. A reporter from Channel 8 News showed up outside my mother's boutique microphone and hand camera crew ready. The footage aired that evening. "Mrs. Turner," the reporter said as my mother tried to lock the door behind her, "do you feel any remorse for what happened with your daughter? Do you regret how you treated her?" Mom turned, startled, her hand hovering over the key. "No comment," she said. Voice trembling, the reporter pressed on. "Do you think it's fair that your daughter helped pay for her sister's wedding, only to be excluded and then sued by her own family?" For a second, Mom's mask slipped. Her chin quivered, eyes filling with tears. She didn't answer. She just walked away. When I saw the clip that night, I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't even feel relief. I felt tired. So tired of pretending I wanted revenge when all I'd ever wanted was fairness. I put my phone down, the screen still showing her image frozen mid-step, and whispered to the empty room, "I never meant to destroy them. I only told the truth." And somehow the truth had found its own way into the world. No louder than a whisper, but unstoppable all the same. A few weeks after the story broke, the city started to forget. But the Turners couldn't. Their names lingered in local gossip like a shadow that refused to fade. I didn't need to ask how they were doing. The internet told me for free. Margaret and Company, my mother's boutique, had once been the pride of downtown Portland. Every socialite, every charity gala guest had walked through its doors at some point. Now, a red sale 70% sign hung crookedly on the glass. The store that used to sparkle with champagne displays and high-end designer racks looked dim, stripped of confidence. One afternoon, a video surfaced online. Someone had filmed from across the street. A group of her regular customers, women, dressed in neat blazers and pearls, stopped outside the store. They peered through the window, whispered to each other, and then turned around without going in. The clip had been captioned, "We don't buy from people who humiliate their own children." Underneath were hundreds of comments. Good for them. About time Karma showed up. Had each family over fashion. The boutique's Google reviews told the rest of the story. A new 1-star rating popped up every few hours. Owner lacks basic compassion, one said. Can't support someone who sues her own kids, said another. The once perfect score was now dragging below 3 stars. I didn't take any pleasure in reading them, but I couldn't look away either. It was like watching a slow-motion collapse of the image they'd spent their lives protecting. Then came the news about Olivia. A mutual acquaintance from our old neighborhood sent me a screenshot of an email from the district school board. Ms. Olivia Turner has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation of unethical online behavior. It wasn't hard to guess what that meant. The board didn't appreciate teachers posting public insults toward family members in viral scandals. For days, she said nothing online. Then her social media accounts disappeared entirely. No posts, no pictures, not even her engagement announcement with Daniel. It was like she'd been erased. Dad's downfall arrived quieter, but cut deeper. A small headline on the Oregon Bar Association's website listed, "Attorney Thomas Turner, under members suspended for 6 months. The reason, conflict of interest and ethical violation in a personal legal proceeding." He'd built that firm from nothing, spent 40 years turning his name into a brand, and lost it in 40 days. Meanwhile, my world grew smaller, but lighter. Evan and I packed up what little we cared to bring and moved north to Seattle. It wasn't far, but it felt like another planet, one where the air wasn't thick with judgment. We found a 1-bedroom apartment on Capitol Hill, bright and modest, with windows that overlooked a row of coffee shops, and the faint shimmer of Puget Sound in the distance. The first night there, it rained softly, tapping against the glass. I stood by the window, breathing it in. "You hear that?" I said to Evan. "That's what peace sounds like." He smiled, leaning against the doorway. "It's about time you got to hear it. We didn't unpack right away. For days we lived out of boxes, cooking takeout in paper bowls, learning to be quiet in a way that didn't feel like fear anymore." One morning, while I was answering work emails, Evan called out from the kitchen. "You're going to want to see this." He'd just opened his laptop. On the screen was an email from Vertex Labs, his company. The subject line read, "Confirmation of promotion." He read it aloud, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "After a review of recent events, the company has confirmed your eligibility and integrity. Effective immediately. You are promoted to senior technical lead." "Congratulations." I walked over, placed a hand on his shoulder. "See, they figured out the truth." He looked up at me, eyes warm. "Truth doesn't need defending, Claire. It defends itself." That made me laugh quietly. "You sound like a motivational poster." He grinned. "Then maybe I've earned one." The day passed without drama. No new messages from my parents, no fresh articles, no calls from reporters. Just quiet. Later that evening, I sat on the couch scrolling through my inbox. Work bills, vendor receipts. And then at the very bottom, a new email. No subject line, no signature. Just 2 words in the body. "We lost." It was from my mother's address. I stared at it for a long time, unsure what she meant. Lost the case. Lost the store. Lost control. Maybe all of it. Evan came over, reading the screen from behind me. "What does it mean?" he asked. I closed the laptop slowly. Everything I said. The rain outside picked up again, a soft drumming that filled the silence. For years I'd imagined what justice might look like, something loud, dramatic, maybe even public. But it wasn't any of that. It was quiet. It was an empty store, a revoked license, a deleted Facebook page. It was an email with 2 words. Karma doesn't need to be named. It shows up when people try too hard to hide the truth. And for the first time, I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt done. The morning rain came soft and steady, the kind that painted everything gray without ever truly stopping. Our apartment smelled faintly of coffee and cedar from the candle Evan liked to light when he worked. I walked out of the bedroom still half asleep and saw him sitting at the small table near the window, a pen moving slowly across a piece of paper. He didn't notice me at first. His brow was furrowed, his handwriting neat and deliberate. I was about to ask what he was working on when my eyes caught the first line at the top of the page. "Dear Mr. Turner." I froze. He kept writing. "You don't have to like me." The next line read, "But I hope one day you understand that love doesn't diminish a person. It doesn't lower them. It makes them whole." The words were quiet, almost tender, too kind for the man they were meant for. I stood there a moment longer, then said softly, "You're writing to my father." Evan looked up, startled, then sighed. "I guess so. I just needed to say something to him. Not for him. For me." I walked closer. "Are you going to send it?" He shook his head. "No. Some letters are only meant to be written, not mailed." He folded the page carefully, slid it into an unsealed envelope, and set it aside on the counter. I wanted to say something, maybe to tell him that Dad didn't deserve his grace, but I didn't. I just watched as he placed the letter next to his coffee cup and turned back to his laptop, the matter already closed for him. Later that day, the clouds cleared just long enough for me to run errands. When I came home, a familiar voice called from the hallway before I could even lock the door. "Claire." "It's Elaine." My mother's younger sister had driven up from Salem. She stood at the door holding a pie tin wrapped in foil, smiling like she'd been waiting for an excuse to see me. "You didn't think I'd let you hide up here forever, did you?" she said, stepping inside. I laughed. "I figured you'd give me at least another week." She handed me the pie, apple warm and buttery, and kicked off her shoes. "You and that man of yours need feeding. I can smell peace and exhaustion in here, and neither cooks dinner." We sat at the table, with slices of pie and coffee. The sunlight broke briefly through the clouds, spilling soft light across her silver hair. "I saw your mother," Elaine said finally. "She's not doing well." I nodded. "I know. She asked about you." She continued, but not the way you'd hope. More like she's trying to understand how everything went so wrong. I set my fork down. Everything went wrong because she kept pretending it wasn't. Elaine didn't argue. She just sipped her coffee, eyes steady on mine. "You're angry. You have every right to be, but don't let them own any more of your peace than they already have." I looked out the window. The rain had started again, tapping against the glass like a metronome. I used to think if I stood up to them I'd win, that if I exposed everything it would finally stop hurting. And now she asked, "Now I just want to sleep without replaying it all." Elaine smiled gently. "Then stop trying to win. You don't need their acknowledgement. You just need to stop letting them define who you are." I met her gaze. "Do you think I could ever forgive them?" She leaned back, her face soft but certain. "Forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook. It's about setting yourself free. You forgive so you can breathe again." Her words landed somewhere deep inside me, not as advice, but as truth. When she left an hour later, the apartment was quiet again. Evan had gone out for groceries, leaving the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the kitchen clock. I walked over to the table where his letter still sat. The envelope was unsealed, the ink dry. I picked it up and read it again from the start. Every line carried the kind of compassion I still wasn't sure I could feel. "Dear Mr. Turner, you don't have to like me, but I hope one day you understand that love doesn't diminish a person. It doesn't lower them. It makes them whole." I folded it gently, placed it in a small wooden box where I kept things that once hurt, but no longer did. An old wedding photo, a seashell from our first trip to the coast, the broken watch my father gave me when I graduated. I put the letter on top, closed the lid, and ran my hand over the smooth surface. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. For the first time in years, the ache in my chest wasn't sharp. It was soft, bearable. I sat by the window, with a blanket, listening to the faint rhythm of water on glass, thinking about how forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a quiet choice you keep making until it finally sticks. I didn't need to send the letter. Evan had already written what I couldn't say, that love, when it's real, doesn't need proof. It just endures. And maybe that was enough. By the time spring rolled into Portland in 2025, the city felt unfamiliar, quieter, slower, like it had exhaled after years of holding its breath. Or maybe I was the one who'd changed. Either way, the Turners were no longer a family anyone talked about. Not in the papers, not at dinner tables, not even in whispers. We'd each drifted to our corners of silence. Dad had officially retired. He sold his stake in the firm and disappeared from the public eye, moving to a cabin near Mount Hood. A friend from law school told me he spent his days reading old case files and fishing alone. The man who once spoke in lectures now lived in Ellipses. Mom sold Margaret & Co. a few months later. The boutique that had been her identity for 2 decades was now a thrift pop-up run by college students. She told one of her friends she needed a break from the city, but I knew what she meant. The city needed a break from her. As for Olivia, she and Daniel postponed their wedding indefinitely. I heard she was working part-time at a local bookstore, avoiding social media entirely. Her name stopped showing up anywhere online. That somehow felt like her truest apology. I'd built something new from the wreckage. Mitchell Events was small, but growing a boutique planning studio specializing in what I called honest weddings. No pageantry, no performance, just real love, the kind that didn't care about centerpieces or seating charts. On a bright Saturday afternoon, I stood in the middle of a greenhouse in Selwood, guiding a young couple through their rehearsal. The bride wore sneakers under her dress, and the groom's tie was crooked. But their eyes never left each other. "Don't worry about where your hands are," I said with a smile. "Just breathe. This isn't a production. It's a promise." They laughed, nervous and happy, and I felt something warm expand inside me. I'd spent so many years hosting events that were built on illusions. Perfect smiles, perfect photos, perfect lies. Now I was helping people build moments that didn't need perfection to matter. When the rehearsal ended, I stayed behind to pack up my clipboard and tablet. The light through the glass ceiling was soft and gold. I caught my reflection in the window. Older, calmer, a little less haunted. That's when I heard the door open. The click of heels on concrete. The faint scent of rose perfume I hadn't smelled in over a year. I turned, and there she was. Mom stood in the doorway holding a cream envelope against her chest. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with gray. The pearls she used to wear had been replaced by a plain silver chain. "Claire," she said quietly, "you look well." I didn't move. "Hi, Mom." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. She glanced around the greenhouse, her eyes tracing the vines hanging from the ceiling, the string lights, the rows of folding chairs. "It's beautiful here," she murmured. "Peaceful. Thank you." She hesitated before stepping closer. "I didn't come to justify anything. I know there's nothing I could say that would fix what I broke." I stayed silent, letting her find her own words. She held out the envelope. "I brought this. It's an old picture. From Cannon Beach. Summer 2010. You were 20. Olivia was 15. We were all smiling. I took it from her slowly. The photo was worn at the edges, sand still faintly clinging to the corners. Dad had his arm around Mom. Olivia's hair was tangled from the wind. I was holding a seashell up to my ear, pretending to listen to the ocean. For a moment, I almost smiled. Almost. Mom's voice wavered. "I keep thinking about that day. How happy we were. I thought if I could hold on to this, maybe I'd remember who we used to be." I looked down at the picture again, then back at her. "You should keep it," I said softly. "I have enough memories." Her eyes glistened. "Claire, I lost my store, my friends, my reputation. But losing you, losing your voice at the other end of the line, has been the hardest thing." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Then I hope you can find a way to sleep again." The words weren't cruel, just simple truth. She nodded, tears finally spilling. "You sound like your father," she whispered, half smiling. "Maybe," I said, "but I learned from you what silence can cost." For a long moment, we just stood there, the echo of who we used to be filling the space between us. Then she turned to leave, shoulders trembling beneath her coat. As the door clicked shut behind her, I exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger rising inside me. I didn't feel the urge to defend, or explain, or rewind time. I just felt light, like something heavy had finally loosened its grip. Outside, the sun dipped low behind the trees, scattering amber light across the empty rows of chairs. I picked up the photo from where I'd set it on the table and tucked it into a drawer, not out of bitterness, but because I no longer needed proof of anything. I locked up the greenhouse, stepped into the cool air, and whispered to myself, "This is what peace sounds like when it finally arrives." And this time I meant it. The wind at Cannon Beach always carried a kind of quiet that felt older than time. Evan and I sat side by side on a weathered wooden bench, the ocean stretching endlessly ahead of us. The sky was painted in layers of gold and violet, the kind of sunset that made the world feel forgiving. Evan unfolded a newspaper he'd picked up at a roadside cafe on the drive down. The front page headline caught the light just enough for me to read it upside down: Local family faces consequences. After wedding scandal. He looked at me over the paper, half smiling. You made the news again. I laughed softly. Guess Portland doesn't let go easily. He set the paper aside, the corners fluttering in the wind. How does it feel? Seeing it all finally. Done. I thought about it for a moment, watching the tide roll in. Strange, I said. I don't feel like I won. I just feel like it ended the way it was supposed to. He nodded, leaning back. Sometimes that's the best kind of ending. No applause, just quiet. I looked at him, at the gentle calm in his eyes, and realized how much of my life had been spent chasing noise, approval, validation, forgiveness. For once, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. A few families were walking along the shoreline, kids chasing each other near the foam, dogs darting between the waves. The air smelled of salt and driftwood. I took off my shoes and dug my toes into the cool sand. Evan watched me for a moment, then said, "If you could go back, would you do anything differently?" I smiled, shaking my head. No, because sometimes justice doesn't need an audience. It just needs time. He studied me, his expression soft. You're not angry anymore, are you? I turned toward the sea. No, anger was heavy. I got tired of carrying it. Now I just understand. The water lapped gently at the shore, each wave smoothing away the footprints that had come before. I thought about my parents. About the woman who once cared more about appearances than love, and the man who believed control was the same as protection. I thought about Olivia, her silence, her half-hearted apology through absence. Forgiveness wasn't something I needed to give them out loud. It existed in the act of moving on, in the simple decision to stop letting them define what I deserved. Evan reached for my hand. His was warm, steady grounding. You built something good from all of it, he said. You didn't just survive, you turned it into something better. I looked at him and smiled. You're part of that something better. He squeezed my hand gently, and we sat there for a while longer, watching the horizon blur between gold and gray. When the sun dipped low, we stood and began walking down the beach. The waves brushed our ankles, cool and rhythmic. The sky dimmed into a deep orange that shimmered across the wet sand. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was earned. Every step felt like a punctuation mark at the end of a long, painful chapter. After a while, Evan said quietly, "Do you ever think about seeing them again?" Sometimes, I admitted, but not in the way I used to. I don't want confrontation. I don't even want closure. I just hope they find a way to live with themselves. That's punishment enough. He nodded. And you, I already found mine, I said. Peace. A gust of wind tugged at my hair, carrying the faint sound of gulls overhead. I closed my eyes, breathing in the cold air, the salt, the sound of waves pulling back and returning again. It felt like life, retreating, returning, never stopping. We walked until the sky turned purple and the last edge of sunlight disappeared beyond the water. Evan stopped and looked back at the line of our footprints. "They'll be gone soon," he said. "Ed, that's the point." I replied, "You can't rewrite where you've been, but you can walk away from it." We turned back toward the car, the boardwalk lights flickering to life in the distance. In the quiet, I thought about how much I'd once wanted them to see me, to recognize that I hadn't failed them, that loving someone different didn't make me less. But now, standing here, I realized I didn't need that anymore. I finally understood myself, and that was enough. As we reached the dunes, I looked over my shoulder one last time. The ocean stretched out behind us, endless and calm, whispering the same thing it always had let go. And I did. If you've ever been made to feel small for loving the wrong person, or for standing your ground when silence seemed easier, remember this: sometimes the quietest revenge is simply living well. Because silence, when it's born of truth, can echo louder than any scream. And every story, even the painful ones, deserves to be heard.